Alrighty. So, where were we with React? We talked about some React in general. We did components, just functions that return some HTML to put in the page. We talked about props some, about how we pass stuff into those functions via JSX. Looks like HTML attributes. And rendering stuff into the curly braces there. So I think, yeah, let's talk a little bit about state next. Before we jump in, what questions or clarifications can I help you with stuff that we've gone over already before we just jump right into new stuff? Anything is up for grabs.
It's hard to say because it's not making sense yet.
Nothing makes sense. Cool. All of it, yeah. We haven't done anything with conditional rendering yet. No, we haven't. Let's ease into it with some conditional rendering then. I think that'll be nice. Over here, great. Cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and share, and we can start building on the stuff that we started yesterday. There, great. So, cool. So here is the stuff we started working on, playing with sketching yesterday. So this is nothing yet. We've just been putting stuff in here. So conditional rendering. I think I'll context. Ooh, we probably won't touch on context at all, in fact, or not context, but and I'll talk about why in a little bit. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about conditional rendering and maybe maybe the iteration stuff too, because it's kind of the same flavor. So cool. Let's look at conditional rendering. So say I've logged in here. The username is Mark. I'm getting that from somewhere. And I've got, let me start up the app and should do the same thing as yesterday. And I'll just have to do, yeah, that's dead. I'll do, oh, localhost works today. Great. Cool. So here's Mark's header. Mark header. Cool. So what I would like to do is, depending on what the username is, I think Mark is going to be the only one who can see all this stuff. Otherwise, or just see the header. Otherwise, we'll put in some other message. So I need to do, there's a couple things we can do. Yeah, so I'm just gonna put in, here's the, I'll just change it to make more sense. You're logged in. Great. I'm gonna get rid of this for clarity. So we have a message, you're logged in. And that happens. I want that only to happen when it's me. So normally you would think about doing an if, right? So you would want to do like, oh, something like if, username equals Mark, then then do what? Then do this. So the problem is that ifs are not expressions in JavaScript. An if statement is a statement. It doesn't return a value. So we can't really have a thing in there. There are some gross ways we could do it. We could like wrap it in a immediately executed function thing. I'm not even going to show that because it's super gross, but you definitely can do it. So the two main ways, and actually I talked with someone this morning about a couple different ways to do it. If you want to make a variable, you can do that in your function. So remember, what is returned from the function here is what's going to be rendered out onto the page, and anything else in the function is just, it's just JavaScript. So we can, say, hey, message. So the message is going to be, well, we'll do a let message. How about that? And then we'll do if username equals Mark, then the message is else. Log in. Cool. So now we have this message variable. And since we can put variables in these things, we can just put that message there. So, hey, you're logged in because I'm Mark. If I misspelled my name with 2 C's, please log in. So now we're doing, right now we're doing an if else to set this message here and putting that message in. Great. That's just like regular JavaScript. Ternaries are also regular JavaScript. So we could also do this with a ternary. So I'm just gonna comment this out. And so the equivalent thing in a ternary would be, and I can use const here, so I'm not changing it. I can say, it does the username equal Mark? Question mark. If it does, the message is going to be you're logged in. Otherwise, it's going to be please log in. And that should behave the same. So please log in. If I change this back to Mark with 1 C, you're logged in. Please log in. So this ternary is the same as this. And so you can kind of think of, this whole part is the ternary. Ternary is an expression with 3 parts. You got your if part here. You've got the thing that is true if it's true, and the thing that is true if it's not true. And you'll sometimes see it kind of done like this. So here's our question. And if you want to, you can even put that in parentheses to set it apart. Not required. So you can kind of see the same structure here. If this, then that, otherwise that. And the main difference here is that this returns this value. So if that's true, it's going to return this value, or it's going to be this value. And that's going to put that in there. And so we can use that the same way there. And so if we want to skip the whole message step and just use ternary in there, let me get all one line again. We can do.
I don't know why I'm gonna mute this because I'm probably gonna watch the video.
There
They won't call anything.
we go. Oop. There we go.
I don't know.
I think someone's unmuted. Cool. So now we can do that same ternary in there. And we can kind of read it that way now. So inside here, we're getting this value. If the username is Mark, then the value is going to be this. And I was kind of like, in my brain, it's like, is this question mark? And then that value, otherwise it's going to be the other thing. So that's how you do conditional rendering like that. Questions or clarifications there? Awesome. Yeah, and doing it this way with if thens up top, if that is more clear, please do it that way. You will definitely see ternaries used most of the time, I think. But again, it's just like JavaScript. So there's a lot of different ways to do stuff, and whatever way works best for you is the right way to do it, unless there's a test. Yeah. I really don't see, I don't know, maybe I haven't sat on other instructors' lectures here, but previous to here, I've never really seen anyone explain it like that. Even, it exists, in C and other languages and stuff too. And it's like, oh yeah, it's a question mark. It's asking a question. Is the answer to this question yes? There you go. Yeah, there's a lot of, and it's not going to click for everyone, right? Different explanations work for different people, but that's what clicked for me. So that's how I explain it a lot of the time. Cool. Any other questions or clarifications about that? And again, this is going to be practice. You'll see, you'll see it. It'll sink in as you practice it. Cool. Similarly, I think I want to look at some. I'm going to erase this here so we can have a little space to breathe. Cool. I want to talk about the same kind of thing, but looping over stuff. So I'm going to just comment these out because we're not using them. So I'm going to have a list of stuff. Let's go back to sandwiches. So const sandwiches and right PB J fluffernutter, so on. Cool. So there are our sandwiches. I'd like to what I'd like to do is put these sandwiches on the page in a list. So I'd like to have a UL with some LIs that have J and so on. All the sandwiches in a list like that. So if I was doing this procedurally, meaning that, and I don't know if I talked that much about procedural versus like the declarative here. What we're used to doing in vanilla JavaScript is procedural, meaning that it's following a procedure. It is going line by line, step by step, and doing a thing. You create an element. You assign the text to the element. You attach the element to this thing. You delete the element. You do whatever. So you giving it step by step instructions about what it's going to do. React, and especially JSX, is more declarative, meaning that instead of giving it the steps what to do, you're describing the way it should look. You're declaring the way it should look. And you can kind of see the difference here. We're saying this is the way that should look instead of if this, then do the thing, otherwise do the other thing. And so that's true for our iterations too. In vanilla JavaScript, we would say, cool, we're going to have an array of stuff. We're going to loop through it either with a for loop or a for each. And each time we're going to do a thing. That's not going to work here because, again, if we put, yeah, exactly. If we do, a for whatever and whatever, or if we try to do a for each, those don't return values. So where my other UL? There we go. Those don't return values. So we need an array operation that does return a value, and David's got it in there. Map is the one that we're going to see the most, I think. And again, map is a method on arrays that takes the array and returns the value. It returns a new array of the same size that has changed somehow. Or maybe it's not, who knows? You could map into the same array if you wanted to. But yeah, so map turns an array into an array of the same size that just maps values one to another. So like if my values are 1, 2, 3, it's going to map those to 2, 4, 6 if I'm doing it times 2 or whatever. So it comes from, it's a math thing. It's mapping values of one array onto another array. So that's what we're going to use here. And I think it's super unintuitive, but it's a thing you're going to see everywhere. And again, there are different ways to do it, but this is the way that you're going to see the most. So we do want to put a value in there, right? So we're going to use our curly brackets. And we have our sandwiches, so we want to put our sandwiches in there. We do want to map it. And here's where we're going to use some arrow functions. We can do an arrow function here, or we can break it out. In general, in JSX, you're going to see arrow functions because they're usually pretty concise. So it's easy to read. Again, there's no reason you can't break it out into another function. So maybe I'll show off the function here, and then yeah, I'll show off the arrow function, maybe break it out, and then see what that looks like. So basically, I'm going to map my sandwiches. I'm going to take each sandwich, and I'm going to map that to with the arrow function, and that's where that's like literally where the arrow function syntax comes from. Say what basically like I'm mapping this thing onto this other thing, and then it just exploded from there. So I'm going to turn each sandwich, and right now each sandwich is a string. Later on, as we do more data stuff, each thing that we're mapping over is going to be an object or whatever. So, but right now we're just taking a string. So the sandwich is a string, and we're going to turn that string into a piece of JSX, which we can do right here. So I'm going to turn it into an li with sandwich in there. And we see we have nested curly brackets, totally fine. You can nest them arbitrarily deep if you want to. If it's more than one deep, think about what you're doing. But yeah, so here we're saying we're taking each sandwich and mapping it onto an li with the sandwich, with the value of that sandwich in it. And remember, this looks fine. It's visually says what we're doing. Remember that these are functions. So basically we're saying take each sandwich and give it to this function that creates the text of the li for us. And then put those all together and stick it in our UL. So if I did everything right, hey, there we go. There's all our stuff. And if we add a thing on there, Portobello, I don't remember. Portobello, there we go. Megan, yeah.
Yeah, if you could go back to your code, at what point do you like break out that unordered list function into its own component? Like say you had a sandwich list component. I don't know. That's where it's kind of losing me in the labs. It's just when they start to break it out into the separate components and how you get that information here. You know what I mean?
Perfect. Yeah, great. Let's do that right now. So to answer your actual question, when it feels right is the reason. If we're literally just like putting list items on a list, I feel like that is okay. If we're taking the text and we're like creating a list item that has a button in it and making it style different with more text or whatever, that's going to be its own component probably because it has a bunch of extra stuff attached to it. So let's take a look at what that looks like now. And then let me know if that answers your question or if you want to add more onto it. So let's go ahead and make a new sandwich component. So it's going to look like that. So I'm going to create a new file here. I'm going to call it sandwich.js. I'm going to export default function sandwich, right? That's going to take some props. So what I wanted to return is something that looks like that. Let me put it in curly or parentheses to make it a little bit neater there. Oops. Cool. So I don't have sandwich here, so I'm going to need to get it from props. So I'm just going to say props sandwich, and this is, it doesn't really look like it as much, but this is kind of an interface as well. And in fact, instead of just doing props sandwich, I'm going to just destructure that right out so we can see. So we're going to be passing in an object that has the key value pairs. One of the key value pairs, we're expecting it to be sandwich because that's what we're going to be using. And this is a, so we have some extra stuff that we're putting in there. Yeah, so this is kind of the interface for this component, right? We know it's gonna return some stuff, but it's gonna be, we're expecting it to get a sandwich that's a string. And we don't explicitly say it's a string here, but we expect it to be a string. So knowing that, now we can go back to our app here, and we know that we're gonna use this sandwich component. We're gonna pass it a sandwich as a prop, and it's going to return stuff like this. And the cool thing about this is, right, we can use this anywhere. It doesn't care where the sandwich is coming from. It could be from a list. It could be, we could be fetching stuff. It could be, generated from a function. We don't know. All this component cares about is that someone's giving me a string that I'm going to call sandwich, a named sandwich, and I'm going to put some stuff out. So instead of mapping it onto an li sandwich, let's import our sandwich from sandwich. Great. And so let's, instead of doing this, let me actually like pop that down here so we can see the difference. Bloop. There we go. I'm going to, what do we do here? There we go. I'm going to map it into a sandwich component. And in there, I'm going to pass that in. So sandwich equals sandwich. So what this is doing is we've imported our sandwich component. We are, and again, that's just a function, right? Because we actually defined the function here. We're going to turn this array of strings into an array of the same size, but instead of strings, it's going to be sandwich components. And each one of those, we're going to be passing in a key, a prop called sandwich. And we're passing the value of each sandwich there. And if I spell it right, it'll work better. There we go. So this should do the same thing unless I did something different. And we are going to have one thing. Yep, there we go. And so it's giving all the extra stuff. This is a blank sandwich. This is a blank sandwich because that's what we defined there. Did that kind of get at what you're asking or go too far?
No, yeah, that was helpful. I just have a few follow-up questions. So the mapping that that function, does that have to stay in this parent component, or the app component, I should say? Or can you move that to the, the thing you just created, the sandwich component?
Yeah, so this is a sandwich. So this is showing each thing. We don't know how many things are going to be in there. So the one we created is just for one. So up here, we would need to map into it. If we wanted to create another component, like a sandwiches component that contained, this whole thing, we could do that. We would pass the sandwiches list into that, and then inside that would have a map into the sandwiches. But since each one of these is just displaying an individual sandwich, we have to have the map up here. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, and you can't you don't have to import anything into the sandwich component because you're pretty much sending it from that app component. Is that right?
Yeah, because we're not using anything else in here. If we were going to use another component inside here, we would want to import it. But right now, it's all it is like literally just like give me a sandwich. I'm gonna give you that string, and I don't use anything else here.
Okay. And one more. The sandwich key, or the destructuring, sorry, in the sandwich component. That's not just some arbitrary value, like it has to be a specific name.
Yeah, that has to match up with what we call the prop here.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, or more accurately, what we put here has to match up with what we call it inside. So
Okay,
they're like, we're building our little building blocks here, our little Legos down here, and we're saying when you use this, you need to pass me something called a sandwich. And so when we use it here, we need to pass it something called a sandwich.
okay, thank you. That makes sense.
Yeah, cool. Something else. Oh yeah, keys, right. So I'm gonna get a warning in here. Yeah, each child in a list should have a unique key prop. So that means whenever we map over something like this, we need to add an extra key. I'm just going to use it needs to be unique. right now, these are unique, not guaranteed though. So that should make that warning go away. That should make that warning go away. Great. And the reason that's there, so normally, if you're mapping over objects or something, you'll have IDs. So it'll be like, oh, sandwich ID or whatever. These need to be unique because of the way that React makes stuff work under the hood. So basically what happens is each one of these, it's creating an element or a component here. When this data changes and it re-renders it, instead of just completely re-rendering it and getting rid of it, it caches it, it saves a copy in memory, indexed by the key. So if you do something with a key again, that's the same key, it doesn't have to make the whole thing all over again. It's just like, oh yeah, I got that one. I'm gonna put that on the screen again. If you duplicate keys or use keys that aren't unique to the things that you're rendering, that can cause problems in the future. I had someone do a project, was it earlier last year? I think it was, where they had data, they were mapping through stuff and putting on there. And instead of using a unique ID, they used the index of the thing, of the array. So they were going array 0, 1, 2, 3, and using the index there. And since it was caching it by that key, the values wouldn't change when they changed the data. It would just be like, oh yeah, I got a 0, but that was the old 0. So short version is make sure that when you use a key here, it is unique and it is attached to that data. It's not going to change for the data you're rendering. That might not make sense right now. It probably doesn't, but in a couple of weeks when you do your project, you'll come up against that for sure. Cool. So that's how you map over stuff. That's how you change data into lists of stuff, which you will 100% be doing real soon. Other questions about this? Cool. Yeah, while we're, I guess I have to do kind of like these at the same time. Let's talk about state then. So right now I'm just keeping these in variables. And that's great. But if for some reason, when they change, when we, change something about them, React doesn't know anything about that. React is just like, I rendered my thing, I did it, great, thank you, I'm done, let me know when you need help again. So we want to, when the data changes, make sure that the view is updated. And again, React has that sort of flow of, we have some data, we're going to render that data onto the page. The page is probably going to have something that lets you change the data. And when the data changes, we're going to update that. And then run again. So let's do, instead of a logged in, let's do a count instead. I'm going to get rid of this stuff. Get rid of that stuff. I'm just going to say let count equal 0. And here I'm just going to do count. Super easy. So count 0. So I don't really have a way to change this right now. So well, let me just put it into state first. We'll talk about state a bit, and then we'll add a button to change it. So like I said, this is just a variable in JavaScript. React doesn't know when those change. So we need to give it a way to let it know when things change. And in React, one of the ways to do that, the primary way you're going to do that for component is called state. State is basically data that is attached to a component. And whenever something in that data changes, the component is going to re-render with that data. So let's move this down here. And there are several legacy ways to do this that were super painful to teach because they were complicated. It is much easier now. They use things called hooks. And basically they call them hooks because they hook into the life cycle, that flow of React. So hooks in React are, all they are again are just functions. They have to start with the word use, USE lowercase, and they'll do different things when things happen. So the one you're going to see most of the time is use state, and that needs to be imported from React. It's imported by name because it's in the curlies there. So use state lets us hook something into the state flow of React. So use state is a function. Use state takes in a default value. So we're going to start with 0. So this is going to create some state in the component, and it's going to set the initial value of that state to 0. What does this function return? Well, let me tell you. This function returns 2 things. And it returns one thing. It returns an array, but that array has 2 important things. I'm going to call it count. And so we're going to, we're going to get that array, and we're going to destructure it immediately. So useState returns this array, and we're destructuring it. And you can destructure arrays just like you can destructure objects. The order in the array destructuring counts, and you don't need, there's nothing named in arrays. So the first thing in the array is going to be assigned to count. The second thing is going to be assigned to set count. Count is literally just the variable that the state is. So count is going to be 0 the first time. And set count is a function. So it returns a value and a function that lets us set that value. And basically what happens is when we use that function, we pass in the new value we want. It's going to, the top level way, it's going to change that value. It's going to replace that value. The precise way is when you use the setter function, it's going to send a request to React to, when they get around to it, set the new value and re-render. Say it that way because it is actually asynchronous. So you have to make sure that just the way, like, you're not waiting for anything coming back from a fetch, you're not waiting for anything coming back from the count. Just kind of let React do its thing. I'll show an example of what that looks like in a second. Cool. So we have this value and the function that lets us set that value, a getter and a setter, basically. So this should look the same as it did before. Count 0, great. Let's hook up let's do buttons. Let's get a button in there. Let me get rid of all this nonsense there. Let's make a button down here. So I'm just going to put a regular button in here. Button. And it's going to say increment count. So that should, great. So when we click that button, as a user, when I click that button, I would like the number to go up. So we actually, hey, let's do event listeners while we're here. Event listeners act similarly in React as they do in regular JavaScript, except that instead of doing add event listener, we're just going to put the event listener right on it. And the way we do that is by just saying on click, something like that. And so setting on click in that function there is telling that, nope, I do not want software update to run right now. It's saying add that event listener to this element. When someone clicks this, run this function. And then we're going to have an event listener in there just like we did before. We can do it, we can give it another function up here like we did before. I'm going to do it inline right now and see if it feels right. And if not, we'll pull it out. So basically we're saying on click, just like other event listeners in vanilla JavaScript, we're going to get an event. I'll say that's an E. I don't think we're going to use it though, because on E, when we get that event, get that E, all I want to do is call that setter function. So I'm going to say set count. I'm going to say count plus 1. Nope, 1. So when we click the button, I'm going to take that event and do nothing with it. I could just as easily do that. It's probably better off because it describes more what it's doing. So when I click that button, I'm going to call this set count function, and I'm going to pass it count plus 1. So I expect this to, when I click the button, it'll show me a new number. Hey, and hey, look at that. It works. Cool. So the cycle is we start off. So the first thing it does is in app, it's going to be, we're putting app on the page. We're attaching it to that root div, right? We're going to run this function, and this function is going to return the HTML that's created from this. We're going to set our state up at 0. So the first time it's going to be 0, and we're going to put that button on there. So the first time we load it up, we're going to see this count 0. So nothing's changing until we click that button. When we click that button, it's going to call this set count. And it's going to say, hey, set the new value to whatever count is that we see on the screen here, plus 1. So it's going to be set count 1. What that does is say, hey, React, I've got a new value for this thing here, count. When you get a chance, update that value and re-render the page. And we can kind of see if we do, let's do this. So every time it renders, it's going to hit that console log. So we're asking it to set the new count when you get a chance. When the new value is set, it's going to rerun this function, return that new value, which is going to have our new count value in it, and put that on the page. So the first time it runs, it's going to render. Because we're in developer mode, it's going to do it twice the first time. So one of the important things that we kind of miss, especially when we start doing fetch stuff, it does do an initial render. It does do that render first time, even if we're doing a fetch or whatever. So whatever happens before your other data comes in, that needs to go on the page. So we are rendering with a 0. When we hit this button, it's going to say, hey, React, change that value and count. When that value changes, it's going to re-render and run that function again. And so we see it did exactly that. It changed the value. When the value changed, it re-rendered and put our UI back on there so we can continue doing that. That's React. This is like basically this is the thing that you'll be doing with added complexity. But this cycle right here, this is like if you can understand this and components, like that is 90% of what you need to know. Yeah. Hannah, yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, if we did, like, I don't know if this, sorry, I don't know if this is going to work, but for like the line 10, would it work if we did like count and parented and then put the arrow with, let me write it down. Let's make it easier. Sorry, give me a minute.
Yeah, I thought that was good. Yeah, so yeah,
I'm ready.
like that.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the problem that will still work. Well, no, actually, it will not work because this, I assume it won't work. Let's find out. Let's see if I'm lying or not. Yeah, so it's giving us an object 1 there. And that's because this is an event handler. So what's passed into an event handler?
So okay, this one will do the same thing even when you have the Pantheon.
Yeah, so it's passing in the event itself. It's passing in the click event. So since it's passing in the click event to that function, we can add 1 to that, but we're going to get, click event plus 1, which doesn't really mean anything.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense? Yeah, so this is just like any other, and we can do, a function, a handle click, let's pull that out here. And so we would take in, the event there. We're not going to use it. Return, actually not return. Set count. Plus 1. So we can just put in handle click like that. And so since this is all in scope, handle click has access to count here. So this looks exactly, this is going to be exactly the same as any other event handler that you would add in regular JavaScript. The only difference is that we can use these state variables in here. And that should work the same. Let's see. Yeah, cool. Does that make a little bit more sense?
Little bit.
A little bit. Yeah. Just remember, this is an event handler, just like the other event handlers. Yeah, there's just more stuff around it to kind of like ignore while you're doing it. And yeah.
So in the videos, they were talking about the asynchronousness of like this stuff. I wasn't seeing that like when you had it running in the console.
Yeah.
Because like it would only like change the number after it rendered it.
Yeah. So let's put this, let's take a look at that in more depth. That's a great question. All your questions around are great. Not just this one. So we're gonna say rendering count here. So this is gonna run when it renders. So when it puts something on the page, this is what we're gonna see. And this is gonna be before click and after click, or before center and after set count. Cool. So what's going to happen the first time we run this to get stuff on the page is it's going to say render and count. Count's going to be 0. That's going to put our button on the page. That's why I should see there. 6. Let's refresh it, get our 0 back. Great. So the first time we render it, it's running this function. This function has a console log in it, so it's running that. It's putting the click function on it. Click function is running until we click it. Cool. So when I click the button, what do you think we're going to see in the console? And I guess it's a question for Anne. Or Kimberly, if you want to. Yeah.
I was gonna say you're gonna see before set count and then count. And then I think you're gonna see after set count, then count, and then you'll see the rendering count.
Exactly. So we're gonna see when we click it, it's gonna say before set count, 0, after set count, 0, and then rendering count. So what it's doing, again, to kind of step through it, is when you click the button, we're running this function. So it's going to run this immediately. That's totally normal. It's going to run this function. And so this function, again, is not immediately setting it and coming back. It is sending a message to React that just says, hey, React, when you get a chance, don't worry about it. No pressure, totally chill. Here's a new value for count. Whenever you get a chance, update that and then refresh. But don't worry about it. It's cool. And then it's like, as soon as it sends out that message, then it's going to say after set count. So that's what's happening here. Before set count, send a chill message off to React. Then after set count, the value hasn't changed yet. And then after React had its coffee, it's going to be like, cool, I've got a new value. I'm going to set that new value. Oh, hey, I've got a new value for this. So I should re-render this. I'm going to run this again. And that's when I get this console log here. And it renders the new value here. Does that kind of answer your question about the asynchronous part?
Kinda. Does it matter too much that it like is asynchronous like that?
Most of the time it doesn't, just because of the way that these apps are built. because we normally we don't use that value until we render it. 95% of the problems I've seen with that is exactly the situation. Literally, when people are like, okay, I'm getting data and I'm going to, I'm going to set my data, and then I'm going to render it to, I'm going to log it to see the data, and the data hasn't changed until I like do something else, and then it'll have the new data. That's because they're logging it right after you're setting the data. And generally, if you want to see what data is being rendered, it's going to be at the top of the function here, because that's when you're getting the stuff. And you're like, cool, I'm rendering with this data. But putting it inside the handler that's changing stuff is not going to give you the answer you're looking for. But 90% of the time, it's going to be not a problem. It's just when you get a bug that seems, whenever you get a bug that seems like your numbers are a little bit off or it's lagging behind, that's your indication that that's what's happening. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah.
Cool, awesome. What other questions do we have about this sort of core loop here? Can we use specific set count, current count? Set count, current count. Yeah, you can. So you can add a function in here that'll return the function. I think that will do it. You know what? I don't remember if that'll do it asynchronously or not. Let's find out. So if we can change this, and we just copy it and comment it. So if we have a function in here, so we're passing a function into set count that takes count and returns the current count plus 1. So instead of just passing the new value, we're passing a function that sets the new value. And does that behave differently? No, it does not. Yeah, that behaves exactly the same. There are some cases where you want to do that. In practice, I don't think I've ever needed to do that. It is definitely a way you can do it. I'm trying to think of when I might have done it and why. Yeah, I'm not sure. But yeah, you can also set a passive function in there. Cool. Yeah, Megan.
I don't know if you plan on doing more examples with the use state.
Oh yeah.
For me, okay, good. Because for me, it's a gray area with like the array that you're, declaring with count and set count and like when to use what. Especially in more complex, scenarios like the labs that we're assigned right now.
Can you describe one of those scenarios?
I mean, the lab that I'm really struggling on, not that we're gonna go through it, but let me see. It was the React information flow, just basically just when to use what and where, because I keep calling the wrong things in different sections.
Yeah, and that's
so I think more examples.
That's the one where it's you're passing in functions to set state back up again. Yeah, we'll go over that one tomorrow, because that's a little bit more complicated.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah,
that would be great.
Yeah. But yeah, so you can have as many different states in here as you want, and it's fine. But yeah, so with pretty much this is the sort of template you're going to see for any time you use state. It's going to be the getter and the setter in that array. You will, these will be different things. They'll be, you might set it with an empty string or an empty object or array or whatever, or have some other starting value. But this is how state is going to look when you set it up pretty much all the time. I can't really think of a case where it's not going to look like that. But yeah, we'll definitely talk about the information flow stuff tomorrow, because that's a lot more, it's a little hairier. Because instead of passing values as props down, we're going to be passing functions as props down. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, cool. Let's see. Yeah, let's you know what, let's set this up for that actually. So instead of putting the button on here, we're actually going to let's see. Well, yeah, do I want to go into it right now? Yeah, we'll go into it a little bit more tomorrow. I think that's going to be tomorrow. Let's break this out into components and work on that information flow stuff. I think that because that'll be hopefully make more sense then. Yeah, I'm so tempted to do it right now. I'm not going to. I'm not going to. I'm not going to. ADHD. Yeah, I think the other thing I want to touch on today is the using forms and kind of like how that works with state and events and stuff. So let me set a yeah, let me set up a quick yeah, we will have lecture tomorrow. We'll do the information flow tomorrow and an overall review. Is it not? Did I not put? Oh, if I put it on the calendar, I should put it under the class, not my personal calendar. that would definitely help. Change that up there. Yeah, just putting it on my calendar does not help you. Great. Cool. Yeah, let's set up a simple form here. And so before I put the form in, I'm going to have a let's just put a string. So I'm just going to put comment name, and we're going to change count here to name and set name, and we're going to give it a start of nothing. And so name is going to be name here. And I'm going to get rid of our button. Get rid of that. Cool. So right now there should be a name with errors. I missed getting rid of what? You state app name. Missed the thing somewhere. Return that name.
You're missing a curly brace after the const name.
Const name.
Well, you've got app parentheses open curly brace, but no closed curly brace.
At the bottom of the function.
At the bottom of the function.
Line 11.
On line 12, yeah, just close it up. The function app doesn't have a curly brace.
The function app doesn't have a curly brace. There it is.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Other people's eyes are the best error checkers.
If nothing else, we'll be able to proofread code.
Yep. Cool. So name is empty. If we set the name to something else in here, that'll show up there. Great. So let's make a little simple form to set the name when you submit it. So I'm going to add a form here. I don't need to put an ID on it. One of the cool things about React is you don't need to put IDs everywhere because the functionality is kind of baked in. So you don't need to do like a get element by ID and add stuff to it. So the HTML quote unquote that you're writing, it looks a lot cleaner. So I'm not going to add an ID here. I don't need to. What I am going to do is I'm going to say a new name. I'm going to put an input here. Text. Great. Why did it do that for me? Void. Oh, input. Yeah. There we go. Great. So I am going to add a submit button to this form. Submit. If I don't give it a value, it's just going to put a submit there. Great. So when I hit this, it's going to do a post, which is going to reload, which is not what I want. So I'm going to put an event handler on here. So let's do this. And I want to put the event handler again on the form, just like regular JavaScript. And since it's a submit, I'm going to say on submit. And I'll just write a function for it. So I'm going to go handle submit. or handle new name, or whatever we want to call it. So let's write our function. And so since this is an event handler, we're going to take the event in. I'm going to call it E right now. First thing we want to do on a post, we want to prevent default, so it doesn't do that post. That should not reload every time. Great. Cool. So what do we want to do here? We want to take whatever's in this input field. We want that to show up here. So what is up here? Up here is our name state. So we need to change that name state somehow and get it to re-render. Well, look at that. We have a function to do exactly that thing. So let's do that thing. Set name. And I need to get the value. So it's going to be, I need a name for this input type. And name is going to be name, I guess. Let me call it new name just to be new name. So it's going to be E target because the target is the form that's sending the event. So I can call new name, and I want to get the value of that. So this should set the value of that new name to whatever was in there and refresh the page. Let's see if it does that. Hey, look at that. And then we probably want to reset. Do we? Yeah, we do. Nope. The target. There we go. Fantastic. So here we're using our form to submit a new value, changing the value, re-rendering it, clearing out the form. So that is a way to do it. That works totally fine. Any questions about this? Yeah, again.
Could you just explain that logic one more time why you added the name, new name field? Like why wouldn't event target, like what would have happened if you had event target value without new name?
Nothing.
Okay.
Because the target again is the form itself, because we can
Mhm.
have any number of whoops we can have any number of fields in there, so we need to target those fields by name. The target is the wrong verb there. The target of the event is the thing that sent the event out, which is going to be the form, just like in regular.
Mhm.
And so all the input fields are going to have a name attached to them, and those names should be describing what data is, and then we're going to get the value of those fields. Does that make a little bit more sense?
Yeah, so is that expected then for like all form or like input fields, we should add like a variable like that to target it correctly?
So if we're doing it this way, I'm going to show you a different way that's more React-y that you'll see more often. But
Okay.
if you're just doing a regular form like this, this totally works. It's totally fine. Let me show a different way of doing it that might help answer your question.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Cool. So a pattern that you're going to see in React often is, instead of doing it this way, we're going to set it to say we're just going to grab a new name. We don't have new name yet. I'm going to set that in state. State. I'm going to set that in empty first. So we've got this value new name. Start file is empty. So we don't have any way to change it yet. So let's add a way to change it. What I'd like to do is, instead of giving this one a name, I'm going to make sure the value of this field always matches the new name state. So whatever's in new name, it should be nothing right now. Yep, that's fine. So if we set a different default value for new name, not that, I want it curlies. Fantastic. So if we set the default value for new name, that's going to be what the state is. So now I want the event handler to change this value of new name. And so there's one more event handler we need to learn here, and that is onChange. So basically, whenever the value of, or whenever, gotta use the right words here, whenever what is typed into the field changes, we're going to trigger off this onChange handler. I'm going to call it handle change right now. So what does handle change do? Function handle change. So handle change, when that changes, what that's going to do, it's going to, here we're going to set the new name. And we're going to set it to the value of whatever through that. So since this field changed when we type into it, every time we hit a key and change that, it's going to call this onChange function, this handle change. It's going to give it the event. Since this is the thing that threw it, that's going to be the event target. And we're getting the value off of that. We're setting the new name up here. When the new name changes, it's going to change the value of what is inside that. So it's a little bit spaghetti logic-y because we're typing into a field and then we're setting the value of that field to the thing we just typed in it. The only reason that works is because of the way React renders stuff, right? But we're going to change it and we're going to set the value of it. And that does not change the value of it. That is setting the new value of it, which sound the same, but are very slightly different. But this is what they call a fully controlled form. And it looks like a little bit of overkill with just one, but with bigger forms, it makes more sense. So this is, yeah, and I think this is the last thing we do today, because this is the spaghetti brain part. This should do the same thing as what we saw before. So if we change that, that changed it. So again, when we, and in fact, let's do this. Let's console log out the new name. So every time this function runs, we're going to say, hey, what is the state of new name here? So it's empty. When we hit a button, it changes the value and sets the value of new name. When that value is set to the new value, it re-renders the page, which is why we're getting this. And new name has a new value, and we're setting that value there. Why is it important to do it this way? I wouldn't say important. Why is it useful sometimes to do it this way? We get in the habit of doing it this way because when the way the React flow works, we want to make sure that everything that we're seeing on the page is generated by data, is generated by our state. So even though we have this value in the page when we're typing in it, and that data only lives on the form in the HTML, if we do it the other way, we don't have a way to access that data without going through the value of this form. We don't want to keep value in the HTML. We want to keep it in our data, and we want the HTML to reflect that. So it's just part of that React lifecycle. We have a bunch of data. We want the page, the view, to reflect that data. And then when we change that data, it's going to change that view. And so we want to make sure that that data lives outside of the HTML. And so we can set this to something else, either through a fetch or through a timer or through some other thing. When we change this data, we want to make sure that this changes as well. Not intuitive until like you've once you've kind of internalized that React flow. Doesn't make a lick of sense, but you will see this everywhere. So that is how we fully control a form, and that doesn't change the functionality of the submit part. It's just changing the value of the name. And then we want to reset. Oh, the data is not in the HTML anymore. The data is in our state. So instead of resetting the form, changing what's on the page in the form, we just want to set the data. So set new name to an empty string. And when we do that, it's going to submit. It's going to set our new name state to an empty string, and that's going to re-render the page and clear out this box here. So what we see on the page, including what's in the input forms, is a reflection of what our data looks like, what our state looks like all the time, no matter what. The HTML is view only. We don't want to directly change the HTML ever. We want to change the state and have React make those changes for us on the page. Not intuitive, especially since we just spent 3 weeks changing stuff manually on the page. There are very few instances where you need to get a hold of an element to do something to it. But in general, the thing that's going to make React make the most sense is you never change the HTML on the page. React changes the HTML on the page. You never have to render anything or change any values or any of that. React takes care of making the page right. You make sure the data is right, and that you give React the instructions to show the page that reflects the data. Once you get that sort of model internalized, React is going to make a million times more sense. Right now, it might just be magic. You say the words and the things happen. Yeah, really internalize that. You only change the data when the data changes. React updates the page. And that's it. Never update the page yourself. And that includes playing with the value of form fields. Form fields are for users to input stuff and for React to render out. Yeah, that's the big nugget of React that gets skimmed over sometimes in the interest of just like type this to make it work. Yeah, that it's in the name. The page reacts to the data. So if you can, and it took me a long time to internalize that. It's a lot of like, how do I change the data on the page? Should I just want to update that thing? You have to update the data first. So yeah, sort of sit with that anytime you get stuck, anytime something doesn't make sense, anytime you're not sure how to do a thing, try to go back to that first principle. Always update your data and let React take care of the page for you. You have to tell React how to do it, but you don't have to do that yourself. Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it today. Yeah. So cool. Yeah, we'll do information flow tomorrow, which means that we'll be basically moving, we'll like move this and we'll move this or the count into components and talk about how we can make child components change data in parents, which you can't do right now because the flow is always downhill into components. Great. Ask me some questions about this because this is confusing. Yeah, Hannah.
I'm just wondering, like, is there going to be like any change if we put like placeholder?
Like placeholders for Oh, so like placeholder in a form like this. You can still use, I think it's the placeholder. Name goes here. And so that'll show up like that as a placeholder. And then when you start typing, that goes away. Is that what you're asking?
No, yeah, that will be included, but also for the initial like the name,
Like an
and
initial
then
value,
what will happen?
like that?
Okay.
Yeah. So that would be setting the initial state. The reason why the placeholder HTML is better is because now you have to erase that and type new stuff. Whereas if it's empty, it just gives you that little placeholder thing. But if you want to set an initial state like that, you set it in state.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Cool. Yeah, let this simmer a little bit. If you get this by the time Code Challenge runs around, you're ahead of me when I was learning it. So you've got at least you've got a week of change to get this down. Yeah, just remember that core thing. You change the data, React changes the page, and that'll help you out a lot. Cool. I think we'll end it there. Any last questions before we wrap it up? Awesome. This is a lot to take in. There's so much stuff so fast. So yeah, sit with it. Take breaks to let your mind decompose it and get it in there. Definitely takes time for digestion. Sleep on it. Take walks. There's a lot of stuff. Make your fingers go. Getting experience typing this stuff in and getting it to work is the best way to do it. Helping other people figure it out, also a really great way to do it. Mostly how I learned it. Yeah, hands on keyboard and take naps and walks. The two most important things. So yeah, cool. If there are no more questions, we'll wrap it up here. I'll post this video in the usual place. Please do ask questions in the channel if you get stuck at all, and we will see you at Stand Down. Thanks for hanging out.